We often look at things and label them as the golden age when you might consider it the peak of whatever that golden age is, whether it's a civilization or a medium like comic books. And sometimes it's looked at not just, the peak of the greatest it could possibly be, this golden age, but it's looked at often as what the origins of something. But with adult collecting, with action figure collecting specifically, which is what this channel's about, how do you judge that? How do you say this was the golden age of action figure collecting? I mean, it's clear, again, with comic books, we know when the golden age was, and we know when the golden age of TV was. I mean, these are things that have penetrated through pop culture. The same with radio. And curiously, all of these things tend to be, that is the golden age of these medium, about the origin, like when they really started. And if you look at action figures back at this time in the 40s and 50s, well, they definitely weren't for adult collectors, and they really weren't quite action figures yet. I mean, sure, we had things like Superman with movable joints made of wood, but, well, even looking at his packages, he was referred to as a doll. The idea of even an action figure didn't exist until, of course, G.I. Joe came along in the 60s and created the G.I. Joe concept and the action figure concept by basically stealing Barbie's play pattern and turning it into a male-oriented concept. It was just about fashion, but now you were loading them up with guns and military fatigues instead of purses. And of course, the introduction of the Kung Fu grip was really what truly defined the action figure. Unlike previous dolls, G.I. Joe could hold things. So yes, you have G.I. Joe from the 60s to thank for every action figure you've ever had that's had the ability to hold something. Fast forwarding to the 70s, well, this is a really big time when action figures took off, when we had huge amounts of selection, different companies getting into it, trying out different scales, trying out action features for the first time. Things like 3 and 3/4 were being created, basically a concept of a figure line that could be compatible with vehicles, which, of course, this was a concept that was used to great success in one of the toy lines that's been responsible for stealing more of my paper route money than any other, and that would be Star Wars. But is this really when adult action figure collecting hit its golden age? Sure, the 1980s saw more toys than we'd ever had in a previous decade, but they were definitely aimed at kids. Of course, a lot of us as adult collectors fondly remember them, but adults really weren't buying these toys. These toys were going to kids who then grew up to be collectors. Now, of course, you had the deregulation of the FCC, which allowed cartoons to act as commercials for toys for the first time, and that was a big reason we had so many at market during the 1980s. But really, I would look at this guy as the start to adult action figure collecting, and love him or hate him, Spawn slash Todd McFarlane slash McFarlane Toys did something that no one else had ever done before. Now, when Todd started it off in the toy biz, he first went to Mattel and licensed out the Spawnmobile. But after realizing that Mattel was making more money off of this than he was, he quickly said, wait a minute, I can do this myself and just put up my own money, which he did. And that led to the first ever Spawn action figure, and really I would say this was the very first toy truly designed for display, not just play, for the adult comic book collector, toy collector to buy. And obviously, that one Spawn figure spawned, no pun intended, oh, that was terrible, many, many, many lines and revisions and etc. It also opened the gateway for other brands to make a comeback, like Star Wars in 1995 with Power of the Force 2. Again, a line aimed at kids, much like the Toy Biz Marvel line, but both of these grew and matured to a point that now adult collectors, as they came into their own, people who grew up in the 70s and 80s with spare income or spare paper route money, well, you saw lines like this literally evolve into things like Marvel Legends by adding articulation and height and detail, paint ops, all things that were really picked up from what Todd McFarlane was doing over at McFarlane Toys. Now, could you say this was the golden age? Was this the peak of action figure collecting? Well, it was definitely the start, much like the golden age of TV, but over the next few years, it was amazing what we got. The number of toy lines that were coming out that, while they were selling to kids, more and more they were attracting adults, like the World of Springfield line from Playmates. While it was a huge hit with kids, it was big with adults. Same with the Palisades Muppet line. Again, very colorful characters, but adults were buying these for nostalgia. And when Lord of the Rings hit in the early 2000s, despite not paying their tooling bill, they came out with some great figures. He-Man even got a chance to come back after 20 plus years off of the shelf. This was a time where there was more product that, well, personally interested me than ever before. I mean, even Star Wars was coming out with such a robust character selection. And you compare this to today, where we're only getting a small handful of figures each year. This was truly a time where you could walk into the toy aisle and it was just an amazing time. And that's how I judge it. That's how I judge what the golden age of adult toy collecting was, based on, well, I guess, how many stops I was making in the toy aisle. And yes, I know that's a little bit of a personal way of quantifying something, but if you think about it, when you go to the toy aisle, how many times do you stop? Do you stop at every line or just keep going? These days, I mean, I still stop at the toy aisle every time I'm in Target or Walmart or, pretending I'm in Toys R Us, but I'm really in Petco. And there just isn't as much that interests me. I mean, yeah, there's some really cool toys out there. And, if you're a Jurassic Park fan, it's a golden age of Jurassic Park toys. But not for me. And again, I know this is about personal taste, and I'm going to get to another factor in a moment that's going to take it beyond that. I think that personal taste can have a lot to do with it because obviously, there were times when certain lines were more robust. I mean, Hot Wheels is continuing to go, and if that's your personal taste, or WWE probably has some of the best action figures that have ever been out for the brand. I mean, they're way more, all over than they were in the 80s or 90s with Jakks, etc. Now, new toys obviously continue to ship constantly, and we're in no danger of the toy industry folding. But as I said earlier, with things like Star Wars, we're only kind of getting a handful of figures each year versus the hundreds and hundreds that we got in the early 2000s. Believe me, my bank account knows. Now, with kids turning more and more to things like fidget toys to deal with the stress of reality in this post-COVID universe where we were all forcing them out of school for 2 years. And then fast forward to today, and we're dealing with just ridiculously sky-high prices for raw material and labor. I mean, paying $20 for a basic Star Wars figure, paying $30 for a 6-inch figure. Looking back, I really do see kind of 95 to 2005 as an amazing time to collect. I have so many fond memories. Masters of the Universe was back. You could buy a Bantha at retail for $30. Springfield had the entire downtown available as a playset. I mean, there were action figures from German expressionist films from the 30s. Not to mention the fact that it was the birth of the Build-A-Figure. And yes, obviously, this was not the world's greatest Galactus figure ever made. There have been improvements since then. And while I still wish that the HasLab one was more classic looking and I would have gotten it, you can't doubt the fact that these figures were $7.99 with a giant Build-A-Figure piece. I mean, $7.99. I know that Hasbro has improved on Toy Biz Marvel Legends figures, and that is a good thing. I mean, we are getting overall better interpretations of figures, but back then, for what we were getting for price and selection, if you were a toy collector, this was an awesome time.
It was the best of times. It was the blurst of times, you stupid monkey.
So what do you think? Agree? Disagree? Do you think we have it better now than we had it 20 years ago? Was this truly a golden age? Let me know in the comments below. And any help sharing these videos with others